Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So my name is Omar Hatamli. I'm the Program Director for the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies Program, and on behalf of the International Space University and the University of South Australia, I would like to welcome you all to this evening's distinguished lecture. Before we begin, I would like just to remind everybody to please put the phones on silent, and in case of an emergency, there is 2 exits in the back and 1 exit here to the left. And in gathering here today, we acknowledge the Garner people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people present. For a long time, philosophers have been debating whether we are the only species in the universe, while scientists have devised experiments to detect signs of life outside of Earth. In this keynote address, we'll hear from one of the topmost Australian researchers in the field of astrobiology that we have learned and learn about what we have learned so far. And we'll also be treated to a thought-provoking travel through time and space to answer the ultimate question, are we alone? Dr. Charley Lineweaver is the convener of the Planetary Science Institute of the Australian National University, where he holds a joint associate professorship in Research School of Astronomy and Astrophysics, and the Research School of Earth Sciences as well. He obtained his PhD from University of California in Berkeley, where he was a member of the COBE satellite that discovered temperature fluctuation in the cosmic microwave background. His current research ranges from cosmology to exoplanetology, astrobiology, and evolutionary biology. Please welcome Dr. Lineweaver.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, yes, my name is Charley Lineweaver, and when I listen to people speak, I like to interrupt them with questions, and so turnabout is fair play. So anytime you have a question, just call out and say, hey, why do you say that, or how do we know that? And if it gets too raucous, then I'll just turn that off. Okay, so this is me, Charley Lineweaver. And, oh, by the way, I hope you saw this last night. Right? Now, one thing that I was talking to people about this, and it's interesting to note that here in Adelaide, you did have a blue moon because there were 2 full moons during the month of January. But unfortunately, I live in Canberra, and the time is 30 minutes earlier there. And the full moon was at 26 minutes after midnight, so rigorously, officially, we did not have a blue moon over there. But we were talking as if we did. But then again, full moons last for more than just a second, right? So anyway, so I'm hoping you saw that super blue moon. And it's super because it was close. It was bloody because the rays of the sun, as they pass through the atmosphere of the Earth and fall on the moon, they get reddened, just like a sunset that reddens the sun. And it was blue because of what we just talked about, 2 full moons in 1 month. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the question, are we alone? And this is an interesting question, and a lot of people think this question is very important. And so I thought I would do a survey here. So please raise your hand. Are we alone? Say yes, raise your hand. Yes, we are alone. Okay, are we alone? No, raise your hand. And are we alone? And raise your hand. Okay, so it's interesting. I've done this survey all over the world, and the results here were about 10% no, about 80% yes, and 10% And that's what other groups say as well. I had a group of mathematicians who were, I think, 20, 60, 20 there. In any case, this is something, in science we don't do this. We don't take a survey and then say that's what the answer is. We try to find out evidence. And so let's talk about evidence. One thing, I had some evidence, is I gave a course called Are We Alone? And after the course, this was kind of before, and after the course, this was the result. And I was very proud of this increase here. And the reason I'm very proud of that increase is because I'm not quite sure this is a good question. And there are several ambiguities hidden in this question. For example, when you say we, do you mean we humans? So you guys who said, no, we're not alone, you say, in the question we, who thought it was humans? Raise your hand. Okay. And of you who said no, who thought it was the critters on Earth, of all the whole biosphere? Okay, so it's about split half. You notice it's about, in this audience, it's split half and half between we humans. Are we humans alone, or are we the life forms on Earth alone? And that split is kind of an interesting ambiguity. And here's the other. So are we the life forms on Earth, or are we humans? So here's a bunch of life forms on Earth. And this is a phylogenetic tree of life forms on Earth, leaving off the viruses because half of biologists think that they are alive and half don't. But there's another ambiguity here. Here's a Scientific American article saying, once we were not alone. And what they're talking about is, if you look carefully, here's a group of hominids, here's another group, here's another group, here's another group. And about 3-4 million years ago, there were other hominids that were similar to our ancestors. Let's say that our ancestors are right here. And here we killed these guys, and we killed these guys, and we killed these guys, and that makes us alone, or at least our closest relatives now are chimpanzees. They're less closely related to us. But here they're answering, we humans were not alone, right? They were not talking about once we, the life forms on Earth, were alone on Earth, but that's true too. Go back about 4 billion years ago, and then we were the only life forms on Earth, possibly. What about this question alone? There's another ambiguity. I was made aware of this I've been going around the world asking people, are we alone? What do you think? Yes, no, blah, blah, blah. And some of them made me aware of, for example, I had a 3-year-old girl who says, no, we're not alone. My family's right out there. And so there's another version of we, the people in this room. So when you're asking a question, you should try to figure out what the words mean. And the we can mean we, the people in this room, or we human beings, or we, the life forms on Earth. That last one would make more sense if we knew what life was. We do not have a good definition of life, nor I don't think will we ever have one. So even you say, oh, we the life forms on Earth, we say that so easily, but I defy you to tell me a definition of life that you can get more than, let's say, 80% of biologists to agree to. Because I already told you, viruses, ask your local biologist whether viruses are life. Half of them will say yes, half of them will say no, and then they'll start a big argument. And then somebody will say, oh, that's not worth talking about. I think that is worth talking about, but I don't think we need a definition to talk about life. Anyway, alone. The reason why this is important is because let's suppose that we find microbes on Mars. Some people think, wait a minute, I'm not looking for microbes on Mars. I'm looking for something intelligent with whom we can communicate and exchange ideas and be friendly with, and they'll help us join the Galactic Civilization Club, blah, 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 blah. And if we just find microbes, well, I'm still alone then. Because there are lots of microbes. If you were here by yourself with a bunch of all these microbes, you would say, I'm by myself, I'm alone. So that's an ambiguity with the term alone. All right. So if we find microbes on Mars, will we still be alone? I know a lot of microbiologists who will be very, very excited if we do. And I know most of the public will not be. They'll kind of think it's interesting for a couple of days, and then they'll just leave the whole thing to the microbiologist to try to figure out how the chemistry on Earth got started and how it got started there and why they're different, how they're different, and how they might lead to different pathways in macroevolution. So most people say, no, we are not alone. This is true. And I've been asking people, what are your reasons? Why did you raise your hand and say, no, we're not alone? Well, here are the main reasons that are given. One is there are lots of Earth-like planets. There are probably 10 to the 22 in the observable universe, and the universe looks like it's spatially infinite, which means there might be an infinite number of Earth-like planets in the universe. So if you have an infinite number of places where life gets started, and you have some probability epsilon of forming life, then life will get started in an infinite number of places. That's the argument. Now, the basis for why do we believe that there are so many planets elsewhere? And that is 2012. Here's a plot of the period. These are orbital periods of planets. And this is the mass of the planet. Here's where we are sitting right now on Earth. Here's Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. This is our solar system. This is the orbital periods, 365 days is right there. This is a Jupiter mass is right there. There's Jupiter's mass. And Earth is about 1/300th of Jupiter's mass. Isn't that right, Paul? 300? 318. Okay, so Jupiter is 318 times more massive than Earth. That's why there's a factor of 318 between here and here. Okay, but notice on this plot that there are lots and lots of dots over here, and there's hardly any over here. And some people think, ooh, does that mean there are no planets over there? No, that just means that it's easy to find things here and hard to find things there. That's known as a selection effect. And as a scientist, you need to be very, very aware of the selection effects associated with your instrument. For example, if you're looking for a planet and it goes around once every 10 days, zoom, 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 you can just look at it for a month and get it to go around 3 times. If it goes around once in 10,000 days, you have to look at it for 10,000 days and you only see it once. So you want to see it 3 times, you have to look 3 times that. And so that's why it's so hard to find things with such long periods here. Similarly, if you have a planet that has 10 times the mass of Jupiter, then that makes a gigantic effect. It can block out lots of light, and it can make that host star just be pushing around. But if you have one that's the mass of Mercury, then it hardly does anything. And you can hardly see it, and there's noise that you have to deal with, and so you can't detect it. And so that's why there are planets here and none here. But what I wanted to show you is that was in 2012, and then 2016, this happened. So this is largely due to a satellite called Kepler that used the transit technique to find this gigantic cloud. And the whole point is, what happened was one of the gyroscopes broke, and then it was making progress, so chung, chung, more and more and more and more, and then boom, the thing broke. And now we're having a hard time. Now we don't have another instrument that can push us out into longer periods and push us out here, well, longer periods in this direction, but also lower masses. And you can see that there are only a few dots around where the Earth is. What we're looking for are Earth twins because we think that, well, maybe the best place to look for life elsewhere would be on places like the Earth because we know that there's life on Earth. That's the argument. And so we're desperately trying to move this cloud over to here. And that's going to take probably 10, maybe 20 years, simply because this is a log-log plot, you notice, and that takes a long time to push in this direction. Okay, but the bottom line from this plot is that planets are everywhere, and when you do the statistical analysis, knowing that you can't see over here very easily, but still you've seen some, you can make a statistical extrapolation into that region, and that extrapolation says this cloud is not just here, it's really over here too. So we have lots of confidence that that's the case. If that is the case, then essentially every star probably has some type of planetary system. This is something that we are very confident of now. We were not very confident of this just 10 years ago, and 20 years ago we said, oh, I don't know. Anyway, this is something that every time you see a star, think that that star has some type of planetary system. Not that we've seen it yet, because we haven't sampled the 100 to 300 billion stars in the galaxy and looked for all these things. But we have sampled enough, and we can, it's kind of like taking a poll. You don't want, what's the election result going to be? Well, you take 3,000 representative people, you ask them, and then you get a result, and then you predict what the poll's going to be. That's the kind of thing that we've done statistically on exoplanets and stars all over the galaxy, and that's why we're confident that every star will have some type of planetary system. Any questions about this? Yes?
Charlie,
say it loudly, please.
When you said about definitions of life, a lot of us are in the position where we're teaching kids. What would you say to kids when they say, what is life?
Well, you say, well, what do they ask them what they think life is, and they'll learn everything. They'll say, animals, mostly vertebrates. Then you should try to say, you know what, there are invertebrates too. 95% of animals are invertebrate. So first of all, introduce them to invertebrate as a new kind of animal that they're not used to, because they're used to cats and dogs and everything you see in the zoo. And the zoo is like 95%, maybe even 99% vertebrates. So getting kids used to the idea that most animals are not the kind that they're most familiar with, that's a kind of a nice start. And then they're plants, then they're fungi. But these are all the macroscopic things you can see. And buy them a microscope and show them the wonderful world of all the things that I showed in the plot there. Yes, question. Loudly, please. How do we know what we don't know? Well, in this plot, so I'll give you a specific example. In this plot, we know how sensitive our instruments are as a function of position here. So we know that, for example, it says here, if you read carefully, it says RV, radial velocity detected. Here is the being detected region, and here is the not detected. This is an RV, so that only refers to this. The point is, if you know you can see everything over here, and then you kind of go down, and then you have nothing here, then you plot your results. Then you have to multiply. So 1 here, but I can only see 1 out of 10. So you multiply that by 10, and then you make it a prediction. So that's how you undo the selection effect associated with instrumental sensitivity. That's true of any science. And so that's how you know where you partially know. That's how you get rid of probably the largest selection effect. Yeah. Question? Pulsar timing technique. Well, let's talk about radial velocity first. Radial velocity, you have a star, you have a planet going around it, and that planet pulls. Right now, for example, the Earth is going around the sun, right? But the sun is not fixed. The sun, what's really fixed is what's called the barycenter. It's the point right here, and the sun is going a tiny, tiny circle, and the Earth is going like this. Jupiter is also going around, but the sun and Jupiter are going like this. So that means that any star with a planetary system is going. And if you were watching this very carefully with a spectroscope, you can see it being blue shifted, red shifted, blue shifted, red shifted. Well, now that's radial velocity. This is a star. Replace the star with a pulsar. The pulsar is going beep, 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 about thousands of times a second, and you are listening to that, and when it goes towards you, beep, 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 beep. So it's these pulses are being blue shifted and red shifted, and by keeping track of those blue shifted and red shifted of the pulses in the almost identical way we're keeping track of the red shift and blue shift of the spectral lines, that's how we find these planets. Matter of fact, when people say the first planet we saw was in 1995, that's wrong. The first one was a pulsar planet in 1992. But people said, it's a planet, but it's not an orbit around a star. It's an orbit around a pulsar, a dead star that's just neutrons, not even a proton in there. And so they said, those are not the planets we're interested in. We won't even consider them planets. Sort of like viruses in life, right? Okay. Any other question? One more question. Yes, sir. You're talking about physics defining what biology is? Now, I'm a physicist too, so I'm very sympathetic to that idea, but try it out on your biological friends. It works 10% of the time. Schrodinger did it in 1948. He wrote What is Life? He's a physicist, and he started biologists thinking about this issue, but if you talk to most biologists, they don't think about what they're studying. They don't think about what is life. They just say, hey, that's life, that's life, that's life. It's like pornography. I don't know what it is, but I'll see it. When I see it, I'll know what it is, right? So, but I'm sympathetic to your idea as a physicist that, hey, because I've written a chapter called We Have Not Detected Extraterrestrial Life, or Have We? And the or have we was based on, hey, I'm a physicist. I can define life in a new way. It's called far from equilibrium dissipative systems, like hurricanes, convection cells, and maybe even galaxies. But that's kind of too weird for the biologists. They said, wait a minute, you have to have the information. Where's the information? But I'm not quite sure that information inside each cell is, or even having a cell is something. Like viruses, right? They don't have cells. Some people think they're life, some people don't. Then they'll say, oh, self-sustaining. I say, what do you mean self-sustaining? I don't know any life form that's self-sustaining. You put any life form in a hermetically sealed box, put it out in outer space, it will die. Life forms are obligatorily embedded in a network of other mutually dependent life forms. So to say what a life form is as if it's isolated, it's kind of a crazy thing. It's like grandmothers are dead because they can't reproduce thing. Okay. So anyway, it's a can of worms. And I don't even think you should spend much time looking for the definition of life. Why is that? But why? That's a very important point, because it's kind of like saying, when was the first Homo sapiens? So when was the first life? We think that life evolved from non-life. And so we'd like to, if you think that, you say, oh, there's a sharp wall between non-life and life. Well, where is that sharp wall? The same problem comes in biology with when was the first human being? Now, you go back 2 million, 3 million, 4 million years, There's never a time in a continuous evolution when you get somebody who's not a human being having a baby who is a human being. That doesn't make any sense. The only reason we can talk about when did the first human beings is because we have a very sparse record of our ancestors. If we had a very, very thick record, here, there's no way we could say when was the first human being. It would be impossible. So when your most profound definition of who you are depends on lack of evidence, and if you know that if you had more evidence, you wouldn't have that, then just get rid of it. The same thing goes for life. If we think life evolved from non-life, and we could go back and we had representatives from that transition, well, then we wouldn't be so fixated on that's non-life and that's life. You understand what I'm trying to talk? A little bit, maybe. You're shaking your head. Anyway, we'll move on. Okay. Now, here's another reason why we think that life might likely be out there, and that is because, first of all, I showed you this. Extraterrestrial environments known to exist a few decades ago, and now these are the extraterrestrial environments we know today. In other words, we've found a whole pile of planets out there, and lots of them are Earth-like. So that's what this yellow thing is here. But also, at the same time, we have a bunch of biologists all over Earth who are looking in extreme environments, really, really hot places, places where there's no water, places where there's just so much salt you choke on it, places where they have, anyway, they're here, hot and cold, dry and wet, acid and base, high and low. Anyway, there are lots and lots of weird environments which we consider, I couldn't live there. But when we sample it, the more we sample weird places like that, we find life everywhere. And so that's why this circle of terrestrial environments known to harbor life has just gone way up here. And so the hope is that we will find some overlap between these and find habitable planets. So that's also part of the reason why so many people say, no, we're not alone. The other reason people say, no, we're not alone is because of movies. You watch enough Hollywood movies, and you find, this is Neytiri, the Omaticaya tribe of the Navi people, Pandora, Polyphemus, around Alpha Centauri A. Now, Alpha Centauri A is a beautiful, large star you can see from the southern hemisphere. And Paul, it's the third largest, brightest star in the sky after the sun, or? Sirius, Canopus, Alpha Centauri. So this is a very bright star, and there we have a planet around there. We don't really know about that, but that's what they say. And then that planet has a moon. That moon is habitable, and that's where these people live. And if you watch these movies, and they're so wonderful, then you start to think, hey, there are people out there. Essentially, these are people, by the way. This 9-foot blue skin, they're people. So no, we're not alone based on Hollywood, based on the plethora of exoplanets that we think are Earth-like. And also, there's one more thing. One is when we look at what life on Earth is made of, we see it's made out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. And in 1953, Urey and Miller did an experiment in which they heated up water. They had H2O, methane, hydrogen, and ammonia. They had electrodes, kind of like shocking this stuff, and then they condensed it. They go around and around, and then they sample this, and they found amino acids. This made the front page of the New York Times and other newspapers around the world when it happened. And they said, scientists discover life in the laboratory. Scientists produce life. Well, what they produced were amino acids. And you are made out of 20 amino acids. The problem was that here's a piece of Murchison that fell in 1969 in Victoria, and it has 80 amino acids in it. And it fell from the sky. So amino acids are being produced all over the place, and all those planets that I was telling you about, in the first billion years of their existence, they had a gigantic bombardment of things, a lot of which were like that. So there were amino acids just piling in. Also H2O, we know that water is a very common element, very common molecule. It's probably the second most common, or the most common triatomic molecule in the universe. Why? Because H is the most common element, and then comes helium, but it doesn't do anything, and then comes oxygen, the third most abundant element. So H2O, of course, will be everywhere. What is not quite everywhere is the temperature and pressure conditions to make it a liquid. But there are so many exoplanets, they will have atmospheres, they will have pressures, and they will be in what we call the circumstellar habitable zone, and therefore probably likely to have water on their surfaces. So the elements for life are everywhere. The liquid water is everywhere. And so you think, well, hey, there's life everywhere. But there's a problem with that argument, and it starts here. although the ingredients are everywhere, what about the recipe? What's the recipe for life? Now, there are about maybe 100, maybe 200 scientists all around the world trying to make life in the laboratory, artificial life, synthetic life. And essentially what they're doing is taking life forms that we know about and kind of taking away things and then putting back artificial things into them. But it's essentially like working already with the context. A lot of these guys are saying, how much information do I need? What's the minimum amount of information I need to make a life form? And you can well imagine if we don't know what a life form is, that there's no good answer to that question. Anyway, we don't know what the recipe is, and people have been unsuccessful at doing this. On the other hand, what do they have to do? Create a human being in a laboratory or something? But maybe life is as quirky as the English language. Now, how common is life? Well, that depends on what's the probability of life, how quirky it is. Very few people think that life is as quirky as English. So if you say, we're going to go find English language or Chinese language or Spanish or Portuguese colonies. I had one woman tell me there was a Portuguese colony around Edda Carina. And she was all upset about the Portuguese-speaking people there. But you can imagine that the idea that somewhere else in the universe someone was speaking a language that evolved here is like, no, you don't believe that. But if you then say, well, wait a minute, what about life forming elsewhere? And you have this generic version of what life is in your head. You say, that's generic. That's not quirky. That's generic. But we're not quite sure whether it's generic or not, but we think it is. Same thing goes with intelligence, I think. Anyway, maybe life is as generic as hurricanes and convection cells. But between here and here, there's a lot of space. This is really quirky, and we should not go looking for aliens who speak English. This is so common that we've already found it. We found the Jupiter red spot, for example. It's just a giant hurricane. We found convection cells on the surface of the sun. Those are convection cells. If you call that life, then we found life. So really, whether we're alone or not will depend on how we define life. And I'm telling you, we don't have a good definition of life, nor should we. Nietzsche said that the only anything with a history, you can't define. An example. Eyeballs. I say, I know what eyeballs are. They have a definition. Well, go back 300 million years and look at the ancestors. And you said, did it have eyeballs? Yeah. Kind of look at fish. Fish have eyeballs, for example. And they diverged something like 400 million years ago from our lineage. And you go back another 300 million years and ooh, those don't look so much like eyeballs. Maybe they're photosensitive spots. Go back another 300 million years and find out what was the thing, the proto eyeballs. And you say, whoa, they're not eyeballs anymore. So the definition you're trying to get at for something that's valid anywhere through time or anywhere through space does not work with anything that has a history. And I think the same thing is true for life on Earth. Because as we go back, we see, hey, there's non-life, and then we have something that evolves into something else, a proto-life, and then essentially what we're looking for will necessarily disappear. I call this the French passport problem. You're interested in French. You love French. I love my French country. I'm looking for the first Frenchman. What do Frenchmen have? Well, they have berets and baguettes. No, that's too. No. I know what they have. They all have passports. So what you do to look for the first Frenchman, you go looking for passports when you're as an archaeologist. But that's silly because passports were, like 100 years old, and we know that there was French people before that. So that's the kind of problems you run into with life. And so stop thinking of life as a Platonic 2 + 2 universal truism. It's something that has evolved. Therefore, don't look for a definition, but do try to figure out how it evolved. Don't go looking for eyeballs 1 billion years ago, but do try to figure out how those eyeballs evolved over the hundreds of millions of years. I sound like a preacher, don't I? Questions on this issue? Yes. Loudly, please.
You said oxygen was the third most common...
H2O is probably the most common triatomic molecule in the universe. Yeah, that's the third most abundant element in the universe. Why? Ask, we have a nuclear fusion expert here. What happens in stars is they make hydrogen, and then they make helium. That's what the sun is doing now. In about 4 billion years, the sun will then, and other stars, make helium into carbon and oxygen. And then if you're really massive, you turn carbon oxygen into silicon and then iron. And then you go boom and you make all the things that are beyond iron. So the nuclear fusion processes in stars of different masses determine what elements are the most abundant in the universe. What's that? The order in the periodic table is not the abundance order, it's how many protons you have. For example, lithium. Lithium is number 3. Lithium is almost nowhere. Very, very low abundance for lithium. But you're right about the first 2, hydrogen and helium. But then lithium, and then beryllium, boron, and then comes that's oxygen? No, it's not. Carbon. So carbon and then oxygen. So these 3 is like a valley, they don't produce that much. Anyway, it's not Mendeleev's periodic table is not in order of abundance, except for the first 2. Okay, so as a cosmologist, I make slides like this, and this is the entire history of the universe on one slide. You start out with a Big Bang, it makes hydrogen and helium, and that hydrogen and helium, these overdensities, these bubbles turn into stars of different masses. Here's a big one, here's a little one. The little ones last for ages longer than the age of the universe. The age of the universe is 13.8 billion years, and these stars here can last like Proxima Centauri. That's like an M5, Paul, is it? Anyway, Proxima Centauri is the closest star to the sun, and we found a planet around it, and its lifetime, well, when the star goes, its lifetime is probably, let me guess, about 100 billion years, maybe 50 billion. The age of the universe is 13.8 billion, so it's much, much older, or it can last a lot longer than the current age of the universe. When the universe is 50 billion years, it'll still be pumping away, shining its light. Okay, anyway, so we have stars. They go boom. These big ones go boom, and they produce iron and nitrogen, oxygen and carbon. And then this detritus, this non-hydrogen helium, can then, in subsequent generations of stars, form particles of debris, and we call them Earth or rocky planets. Somehow life got started here, and then the biologists tell us what this tree of life is, and here we are, an animal on this tree. So we've had cosmic evolution from astronomy to biologists, and different scientists study this process. And one way to look at that is 4.5 billion years ago, this is what this sun looked like, and the Earth and our solar system looked like. It was about a 50 Kelvin to 20 Kelvin molecular cloud in the galaxy, and then 4.5 billion years later, this is what was produced. This is a 2-slide movie of the universe. I made this myself. I was the director. And as an astrobiologist, this turned into this. We know this. These are facts. I'm telling you facts. This turned into this. And the question we have is, how common is that? How quirky is that? Now you could say, we should not go looking for kangaroos elsewhere, but we should be looking for life. Well, is life as quirky as a kangaroo? How about an English-speaking kangaroo, for example? That's even quirkier, right? But we don't have a good science of quirkometry to address this question. So that's why the question, are we alone, is still open. But there's another piece of evidence that suggests that we are alone. And that evidence goes something like this. The galaxy is 100,000 light years from here to here. Let's suppose this is our galaxy. Of course, we don't have pictures of our galaxy like this because no one has ever left the galaxy. Not even Star Trek. They could not have taken a picture like this because they stay in the same quadrant. They stay over here, for example. So if you stay in the same quadrant of the galaxy, you cannot take a picture that's so far away. Anyway, this is what our galaxy probably looks like. It has a little bit more of a bar. Anyway, it's about 100,000 light years from here to here. Now, we can make rocket ships, or very soon we'll be able to make rocket ships that go at about 1/10 the speed of light. You may have heard of Starshot. Yuri Milner is donating lots of money to try to get a bunch of lasers to accelerate a postage stamp size thing to about 20% the speed of light. So twice as fast as what I'm assuming here. Now here's the most mathematical part of the talk. You take 100,000 light years, and you're asking how long does it take you to go from here to here? And you divide the distance by the speed, and you get the time. It takes 1 million years at traveling at 1/10 the speed of light to go this far. Boom, go like that. Now, how old is this thing? This thing is about 10 billion years old. So therefore, in 10 billion years, dividing by this million years, you could have gone back and forth 10,000 times. The reason why I'm saying this is that some people think, oh, you form an Earth, you have water, you form life evolves, it gets intelligent, it produces rocket ships, it goes at that speed. If that's the case, if that train of logic fits in what is consistent with what you imagine the universe to be like, then there should have been extraterrestrial civilizations that have built rocket ships that have gone back and forth over the history of the galaxy 10,000 times. In other words, plenty of time to colonize the galaxy. The problem is that when we look around, and the archaeologists look around, they dig, this is what they see. They don't see any skulls of extraterrestrials. They don't see any signs of extraterrestrial colonization. They don't see any abandoned spacecraft. And when they listen with radio telescopes, we just hear nothing. So if there are, most of the people in this audience said, we are probably not alone. If you think that, and I know that 80% of you do, you have to answer the question, where are they? Right? Now, people have different opinions about what the answer to that is. Some people think, well, they're just very far away because life is not that probable. Other people think, oh, no, they're keeping us in a zoo. They're there. They just don't want to talk to us because they want to keep us like we keep things and, oh, don't let them know we're here. Or another possibility is they are not here. Right? So where is everybody? This is known as Fermi's paradox. There's a couple of good books by Stephen Webb about this. But anyway, we're also thinking about sending signals. And hello, where are you? And I just wanted to show you approximately, this is our galaxy, a 200 light year region around us. We're about this far away from the center, 8 kiloparsecs. And this is how far light could travel in about 200 years. So you can see that only a small fraction of the galaxy has been sampled by us sending out messages. How long have we been sending out messages, maybe in radio, 100 years or so? So only the light that we've created, the radio signals, the television, have only gone out about 100 light years, which is about 1/2 of the radius here. So it's a pretty small part. But here's what Carl Sagan, he has a famous thing, says absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What he meant by that is, sure, we haven't detected anything yet, but that doesn't mean they're not there. Well, there's something that is a subtlety for you scientists, and that is, this statement is true if you haven't looked very thoroughly. But it's completely false if you have looked thoroughly everywhere. So we are in the process of looking more thoroughly. So this statement, as long as if we look more and more thoroughly and don't find anything, then this statement becomes less and less valid. It moves from being true to false. And that's what we're in the business of doing, trying to get the best instruments, get higher sensitivity to detect these aliens who are communicating with radios or maybe gravitational waves. So here's a cartoon to illustrate this bias. We've searched everywhere. So maybe we should stop searching. So I don't think we should stop searching, but we should continue to search. Maybe these aliens, if we find them, they will eat us. Or maybe they'll help us join the Federation of Galactic Civilizations. Or maybe they'll just kill us. I should point out that Stephen Hawking says we should keep our heads down. And what he means by that is he's an amateur of human history, and every time two human civilizations have come in contact, they try to kill each other. And we know one thing about the universe, and that is that the age distribution of Earth-like planets in the universe is such that the average is about 2 billion years older than our Earth. And if you believe that on these Earth-like planets you get life, and then you get civilization, then you make rocket ships, then the average Earth-like planet has had 2 billion years longer to evolve to whatever direction it's going to go. And that means that the chances are, if we make contact with some other civilization, that it will be far, far in advance of us, kind of like us and amoebas. If you ask a biologist, what were we like 2 billion years, they'll say, oh, something like an amoeba, a single-celled eukaryote. And who cares about them? We don't try to talk to them. We kill them without even any qualms whatsoever. So maybe the aliens, they'll see us 2 billion years, oh, those guys, then they'll just kill us. At least that's, I think, the logic behind Stephen Hawking's reasoning there. So we should keep our heads down. Any questions while I'm taking a drink here? Yes. Loudly, please. His question was, what about some unexpected deviations from evolution? Isn't everything a deviation from evolution? Aren't humans and turtles and sulfur-crested cockatoos deviations from, what are they deviating from? There's no pattern that we can identify where it should go. Well, I think you're raising a question is, how much do we know about the predictability of evolution? I'm on this side of the campus that we don't know hardly anything. There are some people like Stephen Conway Morris, who has written a Bible called it's called The Life's Solution. And he thinks that it's all convergent. So he's somebody who studies microbiology, not microbiology, but he studies fossils, particularly the Ediocrins and the Burgess Shale. He made his name on the Burgess Shale. And he has an idea that the selection pressures on life as it evolves are so strong that if we rewound the tape of life to, like, for example, before the Cambrian explosion, so maybe 600 million years ago, we rewind the tape and put the same conditions on, that we would essentially get pretty much the same forms. Humans or humanoids would evolve again. Stephen Jay Gould, on the other hand, says, that's crazy, that's baloney. If you rewind the tape of life, you'll never get humans again, or anything like humans. So biologists, as you can see, these are two diverging opinions, and I'm not quite sure how to get at an answer to this. But the answer to this is very, very important because it essentially answers the question, should we be looking for human-like intelligences elsewhere? Because if Simon Conway Morris is right, then yes. If Stephen Jay Gould is right, forget it. But we're desperately looking through the biological record to try to figure out how strong is convergence and what fraction of that supposed convergence is something called deep homology, that is, something shared by the common ancestor. Example, a lot of people say, oh, eyeballs evolved independently 10 times or 20 times. And then you say, well, wait a minute, an octopus eye and a vertebrate eye. Well, they had a common ancestor about 600 or 700 million years ago. And you can ask the question, did that common ancestor have an eyeball? And the answer is, yeah, kind of. So the common ancestor of two things that we are claiming to be independent had an eyeball. That means they're not independent. Anyway, that's the type of problem associated with trying to figure out what life will do based on convergence. But first you have to talk about the divergence if you're going to talk about convergence. So anyway, it's a difficult problem. We don't know the answer. And so this is a way in which people who study fossils on Earth can contribute to the debate and discussion and help answer the question, are they out there or not? Are we alone? Another question. Yes, sir.
What about the evidence from these ants who've been abducted by aliens, experimented on, and then returned? Where's that?
Next question. Yes, sir. Sir, that is my answer. Yes, sir. Well, most physicists think they're smart. As I've got a physicist over here, he probably thinks he's smart. And because they think they're smart, they think that human-like intelligence, or intelligence in general, is a really good adaptation, and it's good for anything. It's like my adaptation is better than your adaptation. And so physicists, when asked this question, will answer, oh, yeah, intelligence is something that's universally valid, and therefore we should expect it elsewhere. Biologists, however, look around at the critters around us and say, nothing's trying to be a human being. We have zero evidence suggesting that chimpanzees, as in the Planet of the Apes movies, will want to inherit this intelligence niche, which we so define. And so we don't see any evidence for critters trying to be more human-like intelligence. I would say that everything the reason you have a brain is not to be intelligent. The reason you have a brain is to keep you alive. Same reason you have a liver, lungs, nose, the shape of the hair, etc. Everything about you has been selected to keep your ancestors alive, and when it worked, there you are. Same thing goes for the brain. It's not there to solve math problems. It's only there to keep you alive and your ancestors alive. So you take dinosaurs. People said, well, dinosaurs were around 200 million years. Did they get smarter? And it's true that there were some smarter ones and stupider ones, but when we look through the record to see if anything in general starts to become like a human being, the answer is no. So I think the answer is, I'm with the biologists on this one. I think that human-like intelligence is not something we should look for. We have evidence that suggests that it's not a convergent feature of evolution. Thus evidence is New Zealand and Australia and South America and Madagascar. These are all continents upon which there were lots and lots of vertebrates. They had brains, and they had about 100 million years of evolution. And we can look at that and say, is there any evidence without any human beings? Is there an intelligence niche? Because if there is, they should be evolving into it, and we don't see that. We don't see brains getting big. Now, our case was, in 3 million years, our brain tripled in size. Went from here to about like that. That's enormous, and that's kind of quirky. And whether that's a universal feature or not, well, just look around you and say, it's not universal on Earth. Why would we expect it to be universal elsewhere? I think our closest relatives, both functionally and genetically, are here on Earth. You don't have another question. You have to have somebody else have another question. Yes, a physicist. Yes, physicist, go ahead. If we found what? Right, so the type of life we have here is carbon-based and it's water-based. You're about 60, 70% water. And carbon is very important. And so now, I was telling you about the abundances of elements in the universe. Carbon is like this, and silicon is like this, 15 times less abundant. So if you assume that the probability of forming life based on carbon is about the same as the probability of life based on silicon, then there would be 15 times as many carbon-based life forms as silicon-based life forms, just because of the abundances of those two elements. So that's one way. But silicon-based life form, you talk to a biochemist about that, and they'll tell you all the wonderful things that carbon can do, and then they'll point to sand and say, see what silicon does. But to back off, people have, what about Titan? Titan has a liquid there. It's got solid liquid gas. It's got ethane and methane ocean there. The problem is that right here in this the temperature range for us we life forms, is about -20 to about 120 degrees Celsius. Now Titan is like way down here. I'm not quite sure what the surface temperature. Paul, do you know what the surface temperature on Titan is? -180 plus, I don't know, it's 90 Kelvin or something. Anyway, it's very cold. But now the reason why life works is because there's some reaction who has an activation energy that is a larger fraction of kT, where K is Boltzmann's constant, T is the Kelvin temperature, right? That's the energy in the molecules in this room, right? If you didn't have an activation energy, then all these reactions would just go forward. What we do as life forms, we get a catalyst, lower the activation energy, then it goes forward with the kinetic energy. Now, if you're going to do that in Titan, you need molecular reactions whose activation energies are tiny so that the kinetic energy can push them over the activation energy when you lower it with a catalyst. And so we're talking about molecular dissociations of macromolecules rather than things like H2O, dehydration reactions, and covalent reactions that we have with the life that are going on inside you right now that make you ask this question. Okay, how are we doing for time here? 10 minutes, okay. Or will we kill ourselves? Now, here's a comment. I used to think the brain was the most important organ until I realized what was telling me that. It's kind of like, oh, I'm the best thing around. Wait, who said that? Okay, so one way to interpret what's been going on in science is we start out with Copernicus, and he says, you know what, the Earth is not the center. And then Darwin says, you know what, we humans are animals. And then Freud says, you don't even know what you're talking about. And then there's this materialism which kind of says, wait a minute, your brain is made out of electrons. how can you talk about free will? The electrons just do whatever they want to. And so there's a materialism going. Then there's anonymity associated with being this tiny little thing right here in a galaxy here. And then the universe has 10 to the 10th galaxies like this. That's the part of the universe we can see. And then maybe we're living in a multiverse where there are other universes. This is an idea that sounds crazy to most Earth scientists, even crazy to most astronomers, except theoretical cosmologists who necessarily have to invoke quantum mechanics to talk about the Big Bang. Because we're forever trying to get general relativity and quantum mechanics in the same room so we can talk about what happened in the earliest second or 10 to the minus 35 of a second. Anyway, based on quantum cosmologists who know about these things, they suggest that there is something called the multiverse. And if that's the case, then we live in one universe of possibly an infinite number of universes, which really, I'm not sure it helps your ego, but it certainly gives you a sense of anonymity and smallness, which some people find great because they, oh, we're the only human being speaking English in the entire multiverse. Doesn't that make us great? Other people say, well, wait a minute, what's the point? Do I have any meaning here? And so Steven Weinberg said, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. I guess the pointless and anonymity are the same thing for Stephen. Now, on the other hand, you could say, wait a minute. We've got progress and increased understanding. We've understood. We finally realized that the Earth is not the center of the solar system. We finally realized that, yes, we're animals and how we evolved. We finally realized that only a small fraction of our brain is in charge of asking questions and thinking consciously, and a lot of it goes on subconsciously. And then we say, yes, we understand how these processes occur in our brain and elsewhere. And isn't it wonderful that we live in such a lovely galaxy? And wow, a multiverse. If this is the case, wow, how could this 3-pound bunch of jelly understand that we're living in a multiverse? Isn't that great? Anyway, you can see that they're same facts, different interpretations. To find out that one is not the center of the universe may be an important part of growing up. Now, this is Carl Sagan, and one of the reasons that I became a cosmologist is because of this book, matter of fact, The Cosmic Connection. I can recommend it to you. And he got NASA to turn around Voyager 1 or Voyager 2, or which one? Do you know, Omar? Was it Voyager 1 or anyway, Voyager 1 or 2 turned around when it was at about the orbit of Saturn. Paul, do you know the details here? No? Anyway, there's the sun is there, and here's the Earth, and then it was going away. It's going out into interstellar space. And right about here, Carl says, hey, I have an idea. Let's turn around the cameras and look at the Earth. And they said, oh, no. It might look at the sun. You blow out all the optics. And he said, no, we can be careful, can't we? Yes, we can be careful. Anyway, so he took this picture. They got the Voyager to take this picture. And this was, I think, at the time, but maybe even now, the furthest picture that's ever been taken. No picture has been taken from further away. Now, Paul, is that correct or not? It still is the case. I thought maybe it was taken from further than Cassini then. Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so anyway, no picture has ever been taken of the Earth from further away. And there we are. You can see, hello, hi. And here's what he wrote about that. He said, we succeeded in taking this picture from deep space. You see a dot. That's here, that's home, that's us on it. Everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever lived out their lives. Every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every hopeful child, every mother and father, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. I should say not only our species. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there's no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. So, Carl, and this is a statement from Tchaikovsky, the earth is the cradle of mankind, but one does not live in the cradle forever. I think that's one of the things that ISU, the International Space University, is training people to help us get out of the cradle so we can go explore, go land on Mars, try to find some microbes, and then get those microbiologists all excited about the new kinds of life form, and maybe try to answer this question about how did life evolve from non-life, and when life, whatever we want to call it, evolves, is there some kind of direction to it? I'm with Stephen Jay Gould. I don't think there seems to be any direction, But it's a big controversy in biology, and I encourage you to get involved in that debate with some facts. I've told you the ones that I know today. Anyway, thank you very much. That's the end of the talk, and we can have more questions. We can have some more questions, can we? Okay.
Maybe a few more questions.
Okay, a few more questions. Yes, sir. Does it happen? Well, I don't see why not. A lot of people have looked at this issue, and some people say, oh, DNA is optimized for doing blah, 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 blah. But the problem is when you're trying to figure out what is being optimized is there's a context to any type of optimization problem has a context to it. And so the question depends on the context. And we don't know what the context is, but if the context is exactly the same, you might say, oh, yes, DNA would be. You might ask another question would be, what about the code, the ACGT, coding for the 20 amino acids? That's like tapping on here, you get a C. Typing here, you get an S. Is that code something, but the whole point of a code is having it arbitrary. So almost everybody thinks that the code is arbitrary, and you'd never find the same code, but there's argument about this DNA. Actually, you should have asked, does it have to be RNA? Because we're pretty sure, based on the discovery of ribozymes, that RNA preceded DNA. DNA is kind of like a library, and RNA is kind of like oral literature. Ribozymes are pieces of RNA that can not only store information, but also they can act as proteins. As a matter of fact, right now in your body, you have something called ribosomes. And your ribosomes right now are taking messenger RNAs and converting them into proteins. That ribosome is the most important part of it, is a ribozyme. It's made out of RNA. So RNA is doing active work rather than coding information. But there you have messenger RNA being read by ribosomal RNA and turning out proteins. So there you have something that has information, but also protein or enzyme-like action. And so if that's the case, then you don't need DNA. And so we have evidence, pretty good evidence. Most people in the field believe that RNA preceded DNA. But then you can ask the question, why did RNA? And then we can say, oh, because of blah, blah, blah. Well, why something before that? It's turtles all the way down. You want to say again? Well, I have a friend, Steve Benner, who's decided that he wants to produce life forms not with 4 base pairs, ACGT, but with 2 more. I think they're called P and Z or something. And he said, the idea is, if we have 4 letters, like the English alphabet has 25 letters, something like that. Now, the argument is, if the English language had 5 more letters to it, we could have more information. That's the logic. I think that's crazy, Steve. That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. Why not add 30 more letters? There's some I'm not sure how the optimization issue goes with maximizing information. I don't think is what you're trying to maximize is survival. And sometimes you need lots of information. Sometimes you don't need any or very little. And so, anyway, people are making additions to DNA, but then it has to make additions to how you read that DNA, additions to how you produce it, how you destroy it, et cetera, et cetera. It's very difficult. So that's one way in which people have modified it. A biochemist named Eschenmoser is somebody who's looked into trying to get different types of DNA, different types of sugars, for example. There's ribose in your DNA, right? And that's just a particular type of sugar, but there are many, many, many types of sugars. Ribose is a pentose, so it's got 5-carbon sugar. Why not a 4-carbon sugar or a 6-carbon sugar? Or why not a different 5-carbon sugar? These are all things that biochemists play with in their laboratory. The problem is they're playing with the details, and really the devil is in the context, I think.
There's also chirality.
Chirality, right. Chirality is like, you have 2 gloves at home. One is a right-handed glove and one is a left-handed glove. They're the same thing. They're made out of the same stuff. They have the same amount of stuff. They're just one's right-handed, one's left-handed. Same thing can be said of molecules. All molecules are chiral except, I think, for glycine.
Gentleman in the back.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you seem to be concentrating for a significant part of the talk on just our galaxy and the likelihood of intelligent life in it. Well, aren't there about 100 billion galaxies? So that would greatly increase the probability, one would think, of finding intelligent life somewhere in the universe. And then, as you were saying, we've got an infinite number of multiverses. So
Maybe. No, one multiverse, an infinite number of universes in the multiverse.
Right, okay. So, if that's true, if it is, and what is, I don't know whether there's enough supporting evidence of it, but surely that would also increase the probability of getting intelligent life somewhere else.
Right, okay. So here's the argument. I did talk about the galaxy. Matter of fact, some of the numbers I put up included outside the galaxy, included the whole universe, the 100 billion you mentioned. And it's true that the more places you have, the more Earth-like planets you have, the more likely you are to have whatever it is that Earth-like planets produce. The question is the probability, what is your name, sir? Scott. Now, what's the probability of you being here?
Well, given that it's happened, 100%.
Okay. What was the probability about at the Big Bang?
Anyone who was prepared to do the calculations, I would say it would be extremely remote. Yes.
Okay, now, well, I'm not arguing for remote. Remote we say was epsilon. I'm going to argue for set of measure 0. So I think that another way to say that is I think that everything happens is impossible. That sounds ridiculous, but here's a way to understand it. Now, let's say we have an electron in an infinite well, and it has we describe this in quantum mechanics with a wave function, right? That wave function has a peak. That peak has an exact position. So we use real numbers in Hilbert space. Now, that means that the exact position of that particular electron, the probability of it being exactly there is 0. Another way to understand this. Between 0 and 1, there are an infinite number of rational numbers, right? If we have a mathematician here, can back me up on this? Your mathematician. Between 0 and 1, isn't that right? Between 0 and 1, there's an infinite number of rational numbers. Now, they're countably infinite. And between 0 and 1, there is an uncountably large number of real numbers. So you take an infinitely sharp knife and go boom. The chances of landing on a rational number are 0. That's what's called a set of measures. What is your name, the mathematician there? Isn't everything I'm saying exactly right? Anyway, you should talk to her about this. Anyway, there are things called sets of measure 0, and it is possible, and I think probable, that the types of things we're talking about happening elsewhere may be sets of measure 0. But it's very, very hard to talk about the probability of you or me or this room coming together. Now, if it's not a set of measure 0, and it's epsilon, then you multiply epsilon times infinity, and you get infinity. Which means there are the exact same conversation with the exact same people happening an infinite number of times right now in the universe. And most people say, oh, get out of here. How can that be true? And that's my initial reaction. And the only way I can get out of that is if I take epsilon and make it a set of measure 0. And that's why I take that idea seriously. And you take it seriously too, don't you?
Okay, time for one last question.
Okay. Right. Yeah, you're right there.
Less to do with math, but what about the, I know it's in touch, but what about the idea of panspermia, and we are actually just a cross-contamination of whatever other life exists out there, because we're so different from other lives?
You mean people different from... But you think humans came from outer space, but our chimpanzees did not? When did this mixture happen? Well, wait, no, panspermia is the idea, not that you have sex from Vulcans and humans. That's not panspermia. Panspermia is that maybe there was no life on Earth, and maybe, well, actually one version is from Mars. Maybe we're all Martians and life evolved on Mars, and then boom, you hit something, and then you get a rock with a little bit of slime inside of it, and then it travels 10,000 years, lands on a wet Earth, and then says, oh, this is a nice place too, and then it evolves. Mars dries out, loses its water, gets cold, goes through a runaway glaciation, gets so cold that life kind of either disappears or migrates into the center where we haven't found, or closer to the center, maybe a kilometer deep. In the meantime, life has landed on Earth says, oh, this is a nice place, blah, 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 and then you have a biosphere. That's one version of panspermia coming from Mars. The other version is, wait a minute, life has evolved on a planet around some other star, and it either sends out explicitly colonizing rockets that go blap, and then they with bacteria, which they are programmed to turn into intelligent human beings or something. Or I guess you just have non-intelligent life, which just gets thrown off of that planet and then goes through interstellar space. Much harder deal than just coming from Mars, and then it lands on Earth, and then you can have life evolving there. The problem with that idea is it's much more likely with Mars, so that's very plausible. It's much less likely coming from another star unless you imagine you have intelligent aliens who do this explicitly, but there are all kinds of arguments against that. For example, all the argument about Fermi's paradox. We don't hear them, we see no colonization, and they've had plenty of time to colonize the galaxy. You don't need to send a rocket ship, go splat. They can send billions of rocket ships all over the galaxy, or all over the universe, for that matter. So I don't have much confidence in panspermia, except for the case of applying it to Mars being an originator of life and then landing on Earth. Because in the first 500 million years, there's all kinds of transport between the planets based on lots and lots of impacts.
All right, thank you very much, Charlie.
All right, thank you.
Okay. By the way, this will be the last public event by the Space Studies program, by the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program. Hopefully, you will be able to join us next year as well. So now I would like to invite you to reception at the atrium for some drinks and snacks. Thanks a lot.